Student Mentoring Committee of the American Auditory Society. And we are very excited to have Dr. Matthew Winn here talk to us about mentorship today. Dr. Winn is an associate professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Speech, Language, Hearing Science. And he was actually my PhD advisor and has been a mentor to me for over 8 years now. So we're really excited to hear from him. He'll talk to us for quite some time, and you are free to ask questions. We ask that you place your questions in the Q&A section, which you can type in by clicking on the Q&A button at the top of your screen. So here's Dr. Winn.
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen, and you can let me know if this is showing up. What do you think? Can you see?
Looks good.
Okay. So I should say that I'm not able to monitor the Teams meeting. So Stephen or Tina, anyone, if there are things that come up, please let me know. Feel free to interrupt. I'm really glad that all of you made the decision to think about mentorship today. This is something you should be proud of yourselves for putting in the work to make life better for those who look up to you. And for those who are not yet mentors in the room, I hope you'll get a head start in thinking about how you can become one, and also maybe how you can better understand the challenges faced by those who mentor you. So this might go in both directions. I'm really happy to lead the seminar today, although I hope my voice won't be the only one driving the conversation. I don't have all the answers, and I'm not actually naturally good at this, and it rarely comes naturally to anyone. This is a skill you have to practice, as we say, intentionally. The vision I have for this time together is to move past some of the things that might be obvious or not actionable. So I'm not going to sort of give you the definition of what a mentor is, explain why it's important, or just share horror stories. I'm assuming that if you're here, you're already bought in to why this is important. Instead, the goal is for you to walk away with some new skills you can begin using right away. So some of the topics we'll discuss: power dynamics and how you can resist the bad habit of using your power against people instead of for them. Normalizing the idea of struggling with something so that perfectionism doesn't become this cloud that hangs over people's head. Recognizing the actions that people take are driven by motivations and constraints, and understanding those motivations can help us avoid misunderstandings and conflict. Anticipating times when a mentee is vulnerable to you or some other person, some other force, and how to set them at ease. And finally, putting people in a position so that they can give you honest communication. Based on what we know about power structures and how they work and how anxiety and vulnerability works, people don't always feel that they can give honest communication. So we can talk about strategies to how to do that. So throughout this session, I'm going to try to present to you some situations and then some potential solutions that might work for you. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is, it'd be a shame if I didn't begin by pointing out one major barrier for me and many of us who are in positions of power or leadership, which is recognizing the bias of our own perspective. Last year, during a particularly contentious debate about this issue, I dropped into the discussion this webcomic that I really love. Two eagles chilling with an evening tea in the paper. Do you think the owl's a predator? No, of course not. The owl's never bothered me. Exactly. No idea what Mr. Mouse is going on about. And this is funny, but it's also a little bit tragic because these eagles are us. We can laugh at this comic and still remain ignorant of the fact that we take our own our perspective of the world as representing the entire world when we think about other people's struggles. So eagles are overrepresented in academic circles and probably everywhere. And I bring this up to remind us, if you don't think that workplace comfort matters, if you don't notice discomfort, it's probably because you're comfortable. And this is a big part of growing as a mentor. So when we talk about all these mentorship issues today, I'm telling you, there will be a tendency among us to say, oh, that's not really a big deal, or I'm sure that's not such a bad thing that my students struggle with. And a question I want you to always ask yourself is, am I being an eagle here? And so you'll see how this ties directly into many issues of mentorship. So
Matt, I have
yeah,
a quick
sure.
question for you. Can you
Yeah.
ask everyone if they're seeing your screen? We had someone say they weren't seeing it, so I just want to make sure they're seeing your presentation. If you can ask them and people can just pop in the chat, maybe
Okay.
if they're not seeing it, that would be great. I see some thumbs up. That's good. I'll communicate with the person who is having trouble.
Okay, thanks. So let me just start with an example of what this looks like from my own perspective, right? So like I'm a white guy, I speak English, I'm able-bodied, I live in a culture that protects me against ever feeling like I don't belong, right? And there's so many ways of recognizing this and verifying this. Like if you search for professor, you get page after page of people who look like me. And this results in some blind spots that I have to actively overcome if I'm going to mentor people who are not like me, or even people who are like me, to make sure they're also cognizant of these things. If you search for things like confidence, you get a page of mostly masculine images, right? So these are things that seep into our minds and affect how we view the world and how we mentor and how we view other people's constraints as well. So one more example that's more on the fun side than the tragic side. If you look at a map of like where Johnny Cash has been when he refers to like, I've been everywhere, you get this map that's like just the United States, basically. So this is just to say like our view of our own experience is just, it is limited to what our own comfortable world is. So this is something we're going to come back to over and over again, just because it turns out to be one of the major barriers to in the way of being a good mentor. So let's talk about normalizing struggle, or at least normalizing a nonlinear path. I bring this up because students typically don't know the path that you took and have not kept track of your failures and your stumbles along the way. They might assume that at every decision, you made the right choice and that you ascended linearly directly up the ladder to the position you have, right? And the danger in this line of thinking is that if something goes wrong for them, suddenly, well, I guess I'm done, I'm toast. If something goes wrong, my whole plan is at risk. And all of us have had nonlinear paths, right? All of us have. And talking about it makes it seem normal to change your mind, to fail and recover, to learn a lesson, to not be perfect. This is something that we should be more active about, maybe. And in our group here at our weekly meeting here in Minnesota, we try to include a current stumbling block as part of our personal update. So in my group, we share something went well, something that went wrong, and something we're struggling to accomplish. And it avoids the situation where you're just allowed to talk about success or just things that went perfectly. If that's all you ever talk about, then that's going to be what people think you're only allowed to talk about. So even if it's not scientific work, you can talk about a struggle. There was a turning point in my lab a couple years ago where I shared with my students my struggle on how people should address me, right? Because I don't have a lot of comfort with the like Dr. Winn title. But if I tell them that, and oh, don't worry, just call me Matt, then it could undermine other colleagues who do want to use that title and who rightfully deserve that title. And I don't know how to say both of those things at the same time without undermining someone. So this is something I struggle with. And talking about that struggle, I think invited other people in the lab to say, that, okay, you're struggling, I'm allowed to struggle too, right? And this is important to make sure your atmosphere creates space for people to be honest about what they're going through. So I'll give you a few examples of this now, where these are things that maybe you can use. A situation where a student writes a paper and you're giving feedback, and it's a junior student and it's their first paper and the feedback is extensive, right? And you want to set that person up to interpret your feedback in the right way. Years ago, when I was writing a grant, Ed Rubel offered to read it and give me some feedback. But before he sent me the email, he called me on the phone, and I'll never forget. He said, I want you to know right now, my job is not to be your friend and make you happy. My job is to help you get the grant. So when you read the feedback, realize it's about getting the grant. It's not about you personally. And that worked for me. So when I saw the page and it looks like this, I thought, all right, it's going to be okay. It's just a series of things I got to do. It's not about my capacity. It's not about my potential. It's I'm going to use this person's feedback because he's done it for 20, 30 years, and I'm going to reach my goals. And a lot of times we have good intentions, but we keep them buried in our minds. So this feedback needs to be given. And a good exercise for you to do this is to articulate your actual goals, right? So this level of feedback is exactly in line with the amount I give to every student at your stage. And I say this because I think that students are likely to compare themselves to their peers, right? That's why I'm saying it. This is exactly like the feedback I started with, and I'm saying it because it's not a sign that you can't succeed. I did this and I succeeded, so you can too, right? This is going to seem like a lot, but it's normal. And I'm saying that so that you know, this isn't me just showing you that you're not good enough. It's not a punishment. It's not a power move, right? And so all these things, if you take a moment before, a high stakes communication and say, okay, what are the things I need this person to know? Make sure that those thoughts don't just stay in your head, right? Make sure that they actually come out. And this exercise of doing this is a good way to make sure that that happens. And if you're wondering what I mean by high stakes communication, like anything that involves something that a student has put a lot of time and effort into is probably high stakes for them. So make sure you articulate these things. Another example, you have a student who's practicing a conference presentation and it went rough. They don't even want to look you in the eye when they're done. So you want to normalize this struggle. This is the reason why we have practice, right? This is what we all go through. And you can say this, right? The goal is not to be immediately good. The goal isn't to impress me with getting it right the first time. We'll return back to that. And when you see me give a presentation and I sound smooth and polished, it's because I have been practicing for decades, right? I've been practicing this for so long. And here's where you can draw on their experience, right? You have a student who plays violin or does stand-up comedy. They're a drummer, they play chess, all these things that take time to learn. And you tell them, like, if I picked up this activity, like right now, if I picked up a violin right now and I didn't play well, I wouldn't be embarrassed, right? You wouldn't think that I don't have capacity, right? This is just part of the learning process. And if you can ground that in something that they already have gone through, then they know that there's a path that they can go down, right? I'm good at violin. I know I started badly, but I got to where I am, and I can think the same way about my scientific career, right? You can say you've been in their position. All of us have been in that position, right? We've all had the rough practice. It isn't a lot of fun, but it's a normal step along the way. And we can focus on this thing that underlies some of this stress, right? Because it's one thing to be good at this, and I want us to think about what is the reason why a person might have this anxiety. It's because they might think like, oh, I need to be immediately good, right? And it's worth saying there's no extra credit for being immediately good, right? We all work to this. Scientific communication, these skills we have, they take years, but let's think about where the student is coming from. They might have, at every stage of their schooling, been the smartest person in the room, right? They might have developed the identity as the precocious one, as the person who's like surprisingly good at anything. So when the moment comes when they finally struggle through a new process, that could be a true crisis of identity, okay? And so you think like, oh, but you're so good at everything. Of course I have confidence in you. But for them, this might be a moment of true crisis because suddenly everything's changed, right? So it's good to identify this and be aware of it and remind them that it's not a disaster. So at this point, you might be thinking like, well, how do I come up with these explanations or understandings of how a student might be thinking? And it's a good time to recognize that we have a pretty good, sharply tuned set of scientific skills, and you can use your reasoning, right? So for those of you who read the abstract of this session, you'll recognize where this comes from. So we can use our scientific reasoning and use that skill in our mentorship too. So here's a little thought exercise. So I have this auditory training study, 12 training sessions, 4 hours each, and I have a pretty good sample size. 49 people completed all the sessions, and nearly all of them showed improvement on my test, right, after training. So I conclude, super effective training, right? You come along and say, wait a minute. Let's be critical in how we reach that conclusion. 90 participants started, but only 49 finished. The data look really good, but let's figure out what could be the reason why, apart from me just having a great training session, right? Are there any other explanations? Maybe someone only finished the study, they only continued with these 12 4-hour sessions if they were very motivated and feeling improvement, and they had the free time to come into the lab 12 times, and maybe they had white-collar jobs or no jobs at all. You can see where this line of thinking leads. You can come up with reasons. We're good at coming up with all the different possible explanations for something. So we want to apply this to our mentorship skills, right? When we think someone isn't really meeting my expectations, right? Let's understand what the explanation might be. Maybe this student thinks that what you value is speed. And so she quickly makes some edits on the paper, turns it over to you, but it's not very thorough because she thinks you'll be happy if she works fast. And that's what she thinks you're going for, right? That's an explanation. Maybe she spent all of her time formatting the references of the document because she knows that's a thing that you can tell for sure was done perfectly, right? There's no doubt about it, right? And we all find some comfort in that. Maybe she's hesitant to commit to a new section of the paper because she's afraid you'll be disappointed if it's not perfect or if she makes a mistake, or just expects you to change what she wrote, right? So these are, getting into why someone might behave in a way that you don't understand. So I'm going to walk you through some different levels of how you can approach this issue. And I hope that other mentors in this session can also drop their thoughts, maybe in the chat window. So the first level solution is just to talk about different things that you could value, right? Sometimes I value speed. Sometimes I want you to take your time and be creative. There's different kinds of behaviors I can appreciate. And that the student can ask you if there's a particular priority that you're going for. So by recognizing that there are different things, it invites conversation about which thing you're valuing. And then there's, sort of next level solutions, right? Talk about the situation, but depersonalize it. So you can tell about how you had this experience once, right, with another student. She assumed that I wanted it done as fast as possible, and that I would be impressed by that, by her lightning speed. But then that other student and we had a conversation about how that wasn't the thing I was looking for, and we both learned from it. So I learned that I could communicate about these things, and I hope that you and I can have that conversation too. Right? So this is, comparing the situation, but it's not you I have a problem with. Look, I had this other person, right? And I learned that thing. And so this is a normal thing that people learn, right? So it's not even about you. So it's a way of depersonalizing that feedback and softening a little bit, making sure someone doesn't feel like they're under the microscope. It's just like part of your learning process. And then another kind of next level way of doing it, especially if you're junior, is to center yourself. This is not usually what you do as a mentor, but this is a kind of savvy strategy that might work, which is, look, I know receiving feedback from me is not the most fun thing, but if I don't get to do this, then I'm missing out on part of my job that I need to practice, right? I need to learn how to give feedback in a good, helpful way. And so, like, I can only do that if you turn over the paper for me and I can interact with you. So I need that skill. I want that opportunity, right? So what we're doing is framing the goal of this work as not like the student's goal to overcome, but as your goal collectively, right? And that's something we can lean into, right? This is not just the students doing it. It's my barrier too, right? So let's suppose, again, you're seeing maybe lack of progress on the timeline that you expected. And you can say, when I see a couple weeks go by without progress on that paper, I wonder what I can do better to break down the barriers, right? Let's work together to figure out what the barriers are. Is it some kind of writer's block? Is it anxiety? And maybe there's something I can do to reduce that anxiety, right? Like I play a role in this. So again, this is like centering my role because I have this like shared goal with the student, right? So all these things take a level of understanding that is not just, how do I get this person to work harder, but how do I understand what it takes for them to be the best person they can be, right? So all these things are just a matter of understanding. So sometimes it goes the other way, okay? Sometimes you have the opposite problem where a trainee is making lots of decisions without checking in with you. They're going too fast, and you pause and say, like, I don't want to discourage them from being energetic and being motivated, but it's not really hitting the mark. And you want to understand what's motivating that behavior. And maybe at every stage of their development, this person was show initiative, and he wants to impress you by showing initiative. And so he does that, and maybe goes farther than you'd expect. So we can begin the feedback by recognizing the positive aspect of that behavior, right? I like that you showed initiative, and yet, right, there are some benefits of being on the same page, right? Both of us benefit when we have good expectations. So let's return to this idea of using our critical reasoning, right? All of this is like figuring out the reason behind why students might do things in a way that you don't expect. So one of the things that comes up very often among people my age and older is saying, like, why do students nowadays need so much more support than I did when I was in school? I didn't need all the support. And first of all, yes, you did. The lack of support in years gone by, basically that probably just resulted in losing a lot of talent through the cracks, right? And we don't want to perpetuate that. So we can take a moment and think, like, why does it seem like students need more support than you'd expect? And again, like, reflexively, we think, oh, I'm sure it's not that bad. I got through it. But then we use our critical thinking skills, like we did with the research study, right? And we think, well, maybe it's because they just went through a pandemic with no livable wage, or housing costs for them are 3 times as much as when I was in school. They might have to pay out a lot of money for conference travel and not know if they can recoup that. They're expected to publish more papers before graduating than I did. And there's all this messaging about toxicity and academia, like that can cause a lot of anxiety, right? They're expected to produce all this extra stuff I never had to do at their age. They have to have just more achievements, right? When they hit the job market, they're expected to have done more than when I hit the job market. These are real things, as well as the literature just being like so much larger. There's just so much more to learn and keep track of compared to when I was a student, right? And I bring these things up, like, from my perspective, it costs me nothing to acknowledge these things, right? Not everyone sees it this way, right? I think that by acknowledging these things, it is a good start, right? There's a tendency for people, though, to deflect these realities and say, well, but look, I had this disadvantage too. I had to go to the library. I had to get paperwork. This is like the go-to thing, right? I had to go to the library and you didn't. And this is like this cherry-picked example of like, well, I'm gonna dismiss what you have to worry about and focus on the one thing that I can use to leverage my own power in this dynamic, right? And this response just rationalizes not wanting to do anything. It rationalizes doing nothing. And it is a thing that people do, right? People in power do this to avoid feeling blame, to avoid feeling unworthy of the position they have, right? You're going through all this stuff, and I'm concerned that if I say that, you'll think I don't deserve my position. This is a true concern people have, but I'm going to try to encourage you to try to get over that if you want to be a good mentor. So this is the process of gaining comfort with acknowledging another person's struggle, right? If you have a mentee who raises a concern, some burden, some constraint they're feeling, try to resist the urge to say, well, I had it worse, and roll your eyes. But we can understand this, right? I want to understand the mentor who says, well, who just dismisses this, because I want to say to that person, this is not about you. right? You can acknowledge another person's situation and it might cost you nothing. So a big part of this learning process for me was committing to the idea that acknowledging someone else's struggle is not the same as saying I'm a bad person or I don't earn what I have. I mean, I might be a bad person, I might not earn, but it's not equivalent, right? And I think that to see these things as a threat to your legitimacy is a good thing to overcome if you want to put yourself in a good position to be a mentor, I think. So what can we do instead of deflecting? Sometimes I don't have the shared experience, but I can still acknowledge the truth of what someone's saying, right? I can say, yeah, I don't know what it's like to be a woman in science, but if someone tells me about what they're going through, I can say, you know, I'm thankful that you're telling me this because this is not a perspective I would have gotten on my own, right? And if I learn about these things, I can try to be better. And so I appreciate when people tell me those things. I don't try to deflect, because the first time you deflect, guess what? The next time they won't even come to you, right? And you're going to lose that influence you could have had as a mentor, right? I can acknowledge my own position. And this is for people who want to lean really hard into this, right? This is not usually step one for people, but you can say, look, I've never experienced that thing that you're talking about, because my whole career, I've been surrounded by people who are just like me. And they sound like me and they take me seriously, even though they don't have any reason to. A person just looks at me and thinks that I belong, thinks that I have expertise. That's not an experience that everyone enjoys, and that's not fair. I can work to make this better, but first I have to recognize this reality, right? So, you know, the translation of this is, I'm comfortable talking about our differences in experience and how this affects you. And this takes a little while for a lot of people to get comfortable with. So I advise people on the mentorship journey to try to get comfortable with this. It's a lot of people, I was about to say a lot of men do this. It's not only men, but like as a man who was raised in the United States and on the East Coast, this defensive behavior came naturally to me, and I still have to fight it off, right? It's part of the process. So the thing I'm fighting off, and the thing that a lot of us in the room have to fight off, is this urge to impress, right? Like most of my adult young life, I think, I felt like my goal was to impress, to dominate, to be aggressive, to be the best, to show you that I'm the best, right? To get noticed. And if I admit to making any mistake, that means I'm not good. That means I'm under threat. So we land on our next major point, which is that you, mentors, your job is not to impress people. And that's worth like really sinking our teeth into. Like your job is not to impress your students with your power, right? You can certainly use your power to lift them up rather than to impress them. Power is something that plays a role in academia in a potentially really abusive way. So it's worth thinking about how we can resist and turn away some of those potentially abusive behaviors. So sometimes this, you feel this as, oh, I'm going to do this thing, it's best for them, or this is just how it's done. So things like that. It's usually a good idea for us to ask, am I doing this because I just need to feel important? I need to feel power or control. It reflects what I went through, right? Sometimes that's the reason why people do this. It'll toughen them up, or it'll weed out those who don't belong. And so a lot of times what this all translates to is like, I'm going to pass along the pain and abuse that I felt. So a quick way of figuring out if you're falling into this tendency is to like ask yourself, will this benefit my mentee, right? Or will it benefit me? Or will it like benefit nobody? Is it just a power grab for its own sake? These questions can be a good filter. So like we've come across people like this, right? Of course, this is not a picture of an actual person, but maybe the person you think of maybe looks like this cartoon. Like this person who said, well, if you can't take it, maybe you're just not cut out for this. You know, spoken by some guy who never had his legitimacy questioned. And this person needs to feel like superior to people. And it's a good practice to try to resist just needing to feel superior, and instead you can look to use, to exercise your power to lift people up. Find strength in people in ways that previous people didn't find, right? I've had mentors in my life who saw things in me that previous people didn't, and that really helped me along my path. Part of what's involved in that is having multiple voices in your circle, right? So a good simple piece of advice is to encourage people to have multiple mentors. Part of what it means to be a good mentor is to not be the only mentor. Avoid the appearance that your opinion is the only valid one. Sometimes we do this accidentally, right? But if you show someone through a lab rotation or just having another mentor in their life, that if there's not just one style of mentorship, not just one style of running a lab or writing a paper, then you realize, oh, that means that there must be like choices I can make, right? Show what it's like to compromise with someone. And then they can realize, oh, this means that I can find my own style. If you both have different styles, that means there's not just one standard, right? I can find my own. And doing something different than you doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem, right? So I encourage people to have multiple mentors. And another really good strategy is to have a mentor who's just one or two levels ahead of where you are in your career, right? So mentor like just one step down from where you are. And if you're on the rise, or all of us need mentors as well, seek out someone who's right now where you want to be in a few years. Figure out what they went through, right? And it's good on both sides, right? It's really good to find someone who's familiar with the landscape that you're about to enter into, and it's also good for the mentor because you get to like use this experience and feel like it was valuable. Like I struggled through this thing, and now I can pass this along and feel like my experience is worth something now. It's very satisfying. So have multiple mentors, have someone who's just a little bit ahead of you, and also have a variety of voices, right? They might not all be mentors, but like just have a variety of people in your circle just to increase awareness of perspectives other than your own, right? Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go back to some of these situations where we can practice, right? So one of the things that's important is to know what information is crucial for someone to hear. So that's what we'll talk about. So here's like a little situation we're familiar with. You know, someone gives a difficult phone call. Like the first thing I want to say is everyone's okay, but you know, your sister fell off the swing, or you know, but you first say, okay, there's no reason to jump to a horrible conclusion. Let me just put you at ease first and then give you the information, right? So you can prevent a little mini crisis by doing this. So there are lots of opportunities that we have for our mentees, for our trainees, right? So the department admin sends an email, there's something wrong with your scholarship, and you respond, you know, the first thing to say is that your assistantship, it's not in danger. Because that's the most impactful thing for them that they need to hear, right? You got to put them at ease right away, okay? The first thing to say is that the deadline for your homework, not as important as your family. This is tough because you might think to yourself, look, I gave you a whole week to do this homework, and now on the final day, you're going to say that but this is like, and there's a tendency like, oh, I want to make this person suffer for having waited. But look, this is just a power move, right? This is just using power for power's sake. Like if you were in this situation, you wouldn't think of it as a referendum on your time management. You just got to resist the urge to exercise power and just think about what's really important for this person. Another situation, you have a student who submitted a fellowship grant. It was scored, it wasn't funded, right? It got a score of 43. And a mentor says, the first thing to say is, I'm super impressive. You got your grant scored. But the student might think like, I don't feel it, like I didn't get funded, right? I'm in no better position than before, right? And, you know, impressive score doesn't pay the bills, like the grant pays the bills. And so you have multiple mentors, right? And the other mentor says, the first thing to say is every successful person you know has had a grant rejected, every single one. right? And I think you're going to succeed. I've been through this. I have good judgment. I still believe in you, even though you didn't get this grant funded, right? Now they still have bills to pay. They still have to go through this process. You can't just turn off their stress, but you can say the most important thing first. This is the most important thing. The most important thing isn't, let's set up a meeting to go over your summary statement together. That's not the most important thing, right? The most important thing is, I still think you're going to succeed even though this happened. Okay? And so it's a good idea to put yourself into that mindset. What's the first thing this person needs to hear? And that'll help shape your response to it, right? Another little crisis, a student goes to a conference and they pass the receptionist their credit card as they're checking in, right? Now the whole bill is on their card and they freak out because they only have $10 in their bank account and now they have this huge hotel bill. And what they need to hear is, like, the first thing I'm going to say is, you won't end up having to pay for this, right? Just to make sure they know. Because some students don't actually know this, right? I've gone through this, but I didn't know when I was first starting, okay? That's what they need to know. So maybe you have another student who's, their first experiment is an undergraduate student, and they ran the experiment and the hypothesis was completely wrong, right? There's no correlation of anything. And for them, this is 100% of the experiments they've ever run. So it might also be like the most ambitious thing they've done in school. And they might have even like told their friends about how excited they are. And then they see these results and they're devastated. And like, what do they need to hear? Hey, like, the big picture stuff is still fine, right? Like, your CV is still good. You're going to get accepted to a grad program, even though this one experiment didn't work out. And this is me trying to assume a little bit, but I can slow down even more. I can be even better. I can say, what is the thing you're really worried about, right? Maybe the student is worried I'm going to kick them out of the lab, right? Like, imagine someone feeling that. Like, that's not true. Like, oh, no, of course. This is just a normal thing. You're still a part of the lab. Maybe they're worried this means they're not going to have the career they want. They're worried they're not going to impress me. And so you see how this concept comes up, right? Over and over again. There are a lot of reasons why someone might feel motivated or might feel concerned. And I promise you, it feels great to tell someone, oh yeah, that's actually not something you need to worry about. Like, everything's going to be okay. You can't tell them how to feel, but you can, put them at ease. And that's a really good position to be in, right? So this involves them being honest with you, right? You have to put them in a position where they can be honest. And that's a special skill. So I'm going to present to you a familiar situation that will demonstrate why this is a skill worth practicing, okay? So, all right, you're in some kind of classroom or lab meeting, and you went over some important content, and we're almost at the lunch break. Does anyone have any questions before we finish? And think about this, like, nobody's going to speak up, right? Because if they do, they're the reason why we're all late to lunch, or they're put on the spot as, being the reason why we're still in the meeting. So it's worth thinking, how can I phrase this so that I can get honest answers, right? A lot of us have had experience of this in the classroom, right? You ask, does anyone have any questions? And the room goes silent and people avoid eye contact. And like, because who wants to say out loud, oh yeah, there's something I don't understand. Who wants to say, yeah, I'm confused about this? No one wants to say that. So we learn as teachers to phrase things differently, right? I say a lot, like, what are the questions we have? It assumes that there are questions, right? Note the assumption there, that there are questions we're going to work through. I can say, what are the things that we would be careful about when we're explaining this to other people, right? Now it's the other person who's confused. It's not us, right? Of course, you're not confused. What are the things that are most likely confusable by someone else? This depersonalizes it. It's not me who's confused, right? It's someone else who's confused about calculating d prime or whatever. So this depersonalizes, this puts someone in a position, like, I can answer this question, right? I'm not going to tell you what I'm confused about. I can tell you what someone else can be confused about. That's a lot more comfortable for me, right? So think about whether someone can respond. honestly. Suppose you're managing a journal submission, right? And you think like, I might ask my student or my former student to be a reviewer. And like, you can ask yourself, like, are they in a position to actually say no if they wanted to say no? So a friend of mine recently called me up on the phone and said, oh, I have this paper. I think your student would be good for this, and asked me first. And I really appreciated that, Matt Fitzgerald, if you're on the line, because he knew that there's this power relationship he had with my student, and my student wouldn't. And I really like, oh, I don't think my student would be able to say no to that. So let's find someone else who we are sure can comfortably handle this. Okay. Suppose you have another situation. I'm just like rapid firing now, right? That right, your student presented this poster, right? And you promised to meet up after the poster session and take this person to lunch and chat about how the session went, right? Normal thing to do. But then you say, oh, as it turns out, like, we made plans, but I just ran into my old lab mate and he wants to come along for lunch with us. Is that okay? And you can think like, is this person, what if it were not okay, right? Is this person in a position to actually be honest with you? Probably not, right? This student wanted time with you to chat about how the session went, to get your advice, and maybe isn't as comfortable with a stranger, but how could they possibly say, no, I don't want to hang out with your friend? That's putting them in a position where they can't say no. So think about if there are ever situations where you aren't allowing someone to say no, right? That's a power dynamic, right? That's a thing that we can avoid to be, to be better mentors. There's one last thing I'll mention here before we open up for a broader discussion, and that's the need to allow people to heal in their own way, and to feel an honest opportunity to heal, right? Suppose you have a lab member who's gone through something traumatic, and people respond to this very differently, right? They might be worried that their work isn't going to be as good, or they want a break, but they don't want to delay their progress, right? They want to keep going. They don't want to miss the conference that they've been excited about just because they have to deal with the situation. And they maybe don't want to show weakness, right? Especially to someone that they want to impress, remember? And so we can do things that put people in a position to feel these thoughts, right? If we constantly, tell some, it's sort of like, as people talk about raising children, like if you always tell someone how brave they are, how strong they are, then they're going to be afraid of times where they're not strong, right? And they won't come to you. And the same thing can happen with your trainees in your lab. So it's our job not to make this decision for them, but we can put them in a position to do what they need to do, right? So I'm not going to make a life decision for you, but if I've set up the right dynamic, you can make the right decision for yourself, right? So what I don't want to say is you have to take a break, right? I can't diagnose this, right? I don't want to say you're just using work as a distraction, or it's not normal what you're doing. Like these are like really judgmental kind of things. And my heart might be in the right place. I might want them to just, maybe my intention is for them to feel like they can take a break, but these are kind of judgmental, harsh ways of phrasing it, right? I could instead say, I know that you're feeling stressed, and I can depersonalize it from them, right? I can say, when I have felt that way, I have found that I bury myself in my work as a distraction from that stress, right? This is something like, which is just to say, like, I've been through stress before too, and I've made it through the other side. I've noticed some patterns for me. It's worth noting our own patterns, right? If you want to use work as an escape, of course, you know best, right? How would I know what's best for you? You know best what you're able to do, what you're comfortable with. So I can't tell you what to do, but nobody would be surprised if you needed to take a break, right? So this is not judgmental. This is like just saying, like, if you do what you need to do, I'm going to show you that it's okay, right? And so you can use your experience, not just as a scientist, not just as an academic, but just like as a person to shield someone from these feelings that they need to, just deal with their stress and anxiety. You know, I can shield someone and say, I've done this before for this career that I wanted, and maybe the career that you want too, right? That's an important thing, is like, I often preface something by saying, like, if you want the kind of career that I have, which is to say, I'm not going to assume that you do, but if you want this kind of career, here's something that affected me, and I want to make sure that you don't make that same decision I did, because I had to unwind all this damage, and I'd hate for you to have to go through that process that I did, right? And all these things can help you just allow a person, student or otherwise, the space to say what they need to say, right? So we've reached the end of what I have to offer. And now the big slide of takeaway messages. This is how I like to end every talk, which is like, show you the couple of things that I really want you to walk away with. That was bad. And so here for mentorship, of course, it's more than what can fill one slide, but I'll put it up anyway. I'll continue sharing this. We're just about exactly on the time that I promised Stephen and Tina. But read over all these things. It's important, and add to this, right? People who have been in the room, who have dealt with a situation that their mentor handled very well, and they say, I want everyone to learn from this. Or mentors who feel like, I have a strategy that I'd like everyone to know about, right? Make sure that what you learned today is not just like mentorship according to Matt, but like mentorship according to all the combined experience and wisdom of everyone in the room. That would be a good goal. So I'm going to leave it at this and see if there are chat comments and discussion or other things that we can add to what we've gone over today.
Thank you very much, Matt. There are any questions, or taking one out of Matt's notes, what questions do we have? Please place those in the Q&A section now when you can, please, and we'll see what pops up.
This is Tina. So my typing skills are somewhat disabled right now, but I wanted to ask, so Matt, you provided so many good points. If there was someone out there listening who's like, you know what, I after listening to Matt, I want to reevaluate my mentoring approach. Have you gone through any training, either through university or, you know, have you gone through any programs that have focused on mentoring? Like, do you have any recommendations for people who want to sort of seek resources for mentoring?
That's a really good question. I haven't done any formal kind of training. The experience I have that probably contributed to this is having really good mentors myself. Those of you who know me know who I've worked with, and you know, those people have really shaped me. And like going to therapy, like you'll notice a lot of the points these are like the things you learn about in therapy. As well as seeing examples of people more powerful than myself do these things and show me that this is okay, right? Show me that this is a good way of doing it. So I don't have a particular resource to share, but I think seeking this out and thinking about it intentionally, this is a thing I talk about with like science communication skills too, which is like, it doesn't just come naturally. Don't expect it to come naturally. Think about it in every circumstance you can, and talk with people until you meet someone who sees the world the way you do and opens your eyes to things, and then just keep that person in your life.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have a couple of other questions. This is from Stan Gutzvison. Do you have any sort of mentor-mentee compact or agreement that you use with your students?
Oh, I don't, but I think that's a shortcoming of me. I actually like when people have that. There are really good examples of advising statements, which is not the same as mentoring, I know, but advising statements that people have on their websites usually have really good examples of here's what you can expect of me, here's what I expect of you, here's my process. I don't have one of those, but I really should. And I think that it's a good thing to visit and revisit with your mentee. Thanks for that question, Sam.
And there's another. Oh, go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Okay. There's another question. What are some ways we can evaluate how well we are mentoring? And then there was another comment kind of along the same lines. How can we elicit feedback on our mentorship skills from mentees?
Yeah, this is really hard. This is probably not the thing I'm strongest at. The only times where I felt like I've done a good job as a mentor is when I notice when people tell me something that that demonstrates their vulnerability, right? So if people are doing that, then you're obviously a person that they can go to. But sometimes a lot of the things that you do and the impact you have will be invisible. But I wonder for people who have a better view on this, hopefully they can chime in too. Again, just because these aren't things I'm actually good at. So how do we know when we're mentoring well? Sometimes it's invisible. Sometimes it takes a long time to know. Maybe others in the room can share. How do you know when this is working well?
We have another question. How do you navigate wanting to normalize the struggling process, but also wanting to recognize that every person's situation, for example, why they're struggling, is unique, and to not minimize how they feel?
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. So this was sort of like when we had that example about the grant score. I think the first thing I like to do in that situation, right? So this is a conflict. I'm guessing the question about the conflict between how to soothe, but how to not dismiss their actual feeling, right? And a lot of times, what you want to do is make sure that you're not saying something that is sort of untrue from their perspective, right? So I'll give just a quick example. If let's say I am, at this place, I play music and someone plays a song and I say, that was a great song. And they say, well, I don't know, blah, 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 blah. I don't know, it's not really my best. But if I say, I really enjoyed that, they can't argue with that, right? That's sort of objectively from my perspective. So I have that example in mind as I'm thinking about my student. And I think I can't say this is not a problem, but I can say, I still believe that you'll succeed. And that's usually the place I start, right? And then the second place I go to is to ask, what do you think this means for you? Like, how are you thinking about this, right? Because there's a tendency to want to assume, oh, this happened, you must be worried about this. You must be thinking this. But like, they might not be. As you're pointing out, I don't know who asked the question, but it's a really good question. They have an individual experience. They might worry that it means something for their GPA, or that it might worry about it means something for their position in the job market. And you can start to talk through that problem, right? What is the real concern? That would be my second position. And then you go from there, right? So first, from my perspective, I still believe in you. I'm still going to be there. And then what is the real concern? And then you can sort of take it from there, I think. And again, like everything, I hope that others will chime in. I think that okay, now I'm seeing some things in the chat from Monita, from Beth. Okay, I'm really glad that others are chiming into this as well.
There's another great question about being broader than what's been discussed, which is people who come to these meetings really care about being good mentors and improving. But what do we do when maybe we have colleagues that we see struggling with students, and how do we address that without undermining the other colleague?
Yeah, I think that this is a time where like that colleague might be a mentee, right? I mean, I guess it's challenging to make sure they don't feel like you're expressing power over them, right? If I feel like I want to take on someone as a mentor, but they feel like a peer, that can be awkward. This is a really good question. I wish I had an easy answer for this, but I would approach it in the same way that I approach with a mentee, just to start, thinking about if they're, maybe they're struggling with mentorship, and then I would tell them about some of the things that are up on the screen now. I don't know, maybe I should widen my view of what this question is. So like the colleague is struggling with, I guess there's a lot of things we can struggle with mentorship, with their own performance. I would start with some of the basic things that we see here. Sometimes I ask someone if they feel like they need the student to be more like them, or if they have thought about what it means to mentor someone who's unlike them, and go from there. But I'm sure others, maybe even more experienced than I am, can give some input for how they've done that too.
Yeah. So we want to, there's a lot of great questions, and there are opportunities to continue this discussion more asynchronously. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we have one last announcement from Lori. She put something in the chat, but I think she can quickly describe a little bit more about our mentoring community.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
you're good.
Okay, I have a terrible echo, so I have to quickly just ignore that and try to get through this. Okay, so we are so thrilled that all of you joined us today. This was a huge outpouring of support, and we love it. We would like to encourage that to continue. And by doing so, you can check out our community with the link that is on the front page of the AAS website. And you can always reach out to any of us that are on the committee to ask questions.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time.
Go ahead, Stephen.
And just a final thing, it was recorded today. So if you want to revisit it, or you have a colleague that you want to share this with, that maybe could answer that question about sharing good mentoring skills, then we will have it up on the mentoring community, and we'll also put it on the AAS YouTube channel so that it can be accessed there as well.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Hope everyone has a good rest of their day.